إذا ما قال لي ربي أما استحييت تعصيني وتخفي الذنب عن خلقي وبالعصيان تأتيني فكيف أجيب يا ويحي ومن ذا سوف يحميني أسلي النفس بالآمال من حين إلى حين وأنسى ما وراء الموت ماذا بعد تكفيني كأني قد ضمنت العيش ليس الموت يأتيني وجاءت سكرة الموت الشديدة من سيحميني نظرت إلى الوجوه أليس منهم من سيفديني.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الشيطان لكم عدو فاتخذوه عدوا. وقال جل وعلا في مقام آخر إن الشيطان لكم عدو مبين. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الشيطان يجري من الإنسان مجرى الدم. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الأمين الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. पिछले हफ्ते हमने अहादीस करीमा में जो दुआएं वारिद है उसके सिलसिले में समाप्त किया था कि हमें वो दुआएं पढ़नी चाहिए, याद करनी चाहिए, उसे पढ़ना चाहिए. इस अहद में और इस दर्स में आज बहुत ही अहम मौजू है और चूँकि इंशाअल्लाह करीब रजब शरीफ का महीना शुरू होने वाला है. The month of Rajab is going to start very soon and Rajab is the month of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rajab is the preamble to the month of Ramadan. If you waste the month of Rajab and the month of Sha'ban before Ramadan, you will not get the essence of the month of Ramadan. The spirit of Ramadan lies in preparation at least 2 to 3 months before. Obviously it should have been before, but especially in these sacred months. Rajab is the month of Allah, Sha'ban is the month of the beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Ramadan is your month, our month, the month of the Ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they give an example that in the month of Rajab you sow the seed, you plant the seed of your good deeds. रजब शरीफ के महीने में आप नेकियों की बीज बोते हैं और शाबान में नेकियां करके आप उसको पानी देते हैं. You give water, you irrigate that crop, you give it water so that it grows. And then inshallah in the month of Ramadan you harvest that crop, you reap the fruits, you take the fruit from that grown tree. But if you've not planted the seed initially, you're not going to get the end result at the end in the month of Ramadan. So therefore it is very important for us to prepare, and the preparation, how we can prepare for the month of Ramadan is what Imam al-Wahhab al-Sha'rani radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentions here, is to be in a constant fight against shaytaan. And the greatest shaytaan within, i.e. your nafs, your self-ego. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about shaytaan in many verses of the Quran, warning us, take heed from him. He is Iblis, Azazil. Okay? Someone who deceives people, hallucinates them. Ye shaitan ka kaam hai. And before he was very close, in the proximity of the angels, but then he went against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threw him out, he cast him out of Jannah. Inna alayka la'anati ila yawmiddin. indeed upon you is my curse until the day of resurrection. Look at how bold he was, how arrogant he was to answer back to Allah. And he said, قَالَ فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَّا عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I swear by your might, I will tempt all but your chosen servants. I will tempt all of them. मैं सबको गुमराह करूंगा. शैतान ये कह रहा है. لَأُضِلَّنَّهُمْ وَلَأُمَنِّيَنَّهُمْ एक और आयत में है कि शैतान को जब धुतकार दिया गया, निकाल दिया गया अल्लाह ताला की बारगाह से मरदूद होकर के, मलऊन होकर के, तो उसने फिर कसम खाई ताकीद के साथ कि मैं जरूर लोगों को गुमराह करूंगा, मगर अल्लाह ताला तेरे खास बंदे को मैं गुमराह नहीं कर पाऊंगा. वो खास बंदे कौन? जो अपने नफ्स का मुहासबा करते हैं और शैतान के वार और शैतान की गुजरगाहों को पहचानते हैं और उसके वार को रोकने की कोशिश करते हैं. इसीलिए इमाम शानी रहमतुल्लाह अलैह ने इस अहद के अंदर शैतान को पहचानने और शैतान के हमलों को रोकने की कोशिश करने के सिलसिले में ताकीद फरमाई है. और उसके बाद अल्लाह रब्बुल इज्जत ये फरमाता है कि शैतान ने क्या कहा? लअक़उदन्न लहुम सिरातकल मुस्तक़ीम थुम्मा लआतियन्नहुम मिन बैन अयदीहिम व मिन खल्फिहिम व अन अयमानिहिम व अन शमाइलिहिम व ला तजिदु अक्सरहुम शाकिरीन. I will lie in wait for them all on your straight path. नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम इसको एक मिसाल के तौर पर पेश फरमाया. नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने एक लकीर उठाई और आपने जमीन पर एक लकीर खींची. He drew a line और फरमाया ये अल्लाह ताला का रास्ता है. This is as-sirat al-mustaqim, the only one way towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is only one way. He can't make shortcuts. There is only one way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam drew other lines. Next to that straight line, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam drew a couple of lines, many lines on the right and many lines to the left. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, on each of them lies shaytaan in a wait to ensnare people and misguide them from the straight path. There is only one straight path, but the paths which will misguide you are many. And this is why it is a struggle for every single person living, especially in this environment that we are in, to find that straight path, to be steadfast on it. Because there are many temptations and delusions of the shaitan. There are 101 ways in which a person can be misguided. More than that, in fact. But there is only one path that will lead you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is by you prostrating your forehead before Him and attaching yourself to the mosques. This is the only way. Because there are many temptations. The best of people who we thought were best, they have been misguided. And therefore we need to do mujahada and struggle. We need to find from which areas the shaitan attacks us. Because if you don't know the areas from which the shaitan attacks, the aspects from which he deludes you, the aspects from which he misguides you, then very soon he will ensnare you, you will be in his trap. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about this enemy of ours, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. He is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. Don't befriend him. Okay, these temptations that we have in this day and age, with the new technological equipment that we have, new technology and so forth at our fingertips, at our ease, these are the temptations of shaitan, the devil. Okay? So we should be heedful about what's happening. Shaitan के बात को समझना चाहिए कि किस तरीके से इबादतों में खलल डालता है, वसवसे डालता है. यहाँ तक कि अगर आपने शैतान के वार को रोका नहीं तो बहुत यानी आइन मुमकिन है कि तुम्हारे ईमान में भी वसवसा डालने की वो कोशिश करे, शक में आपको डाले और फिर आपकी मौत शक के ऊपर हो, वाक़ई हो, नाउज़ बिल्लाह. और एक और हदीस शरीफ में नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम इरशाद फरमाया, इन्न शैतान यजरी मिनल इंसानी मजरा दम. Indeed, the shaitan circulates around your body, around the body of the human being, like blood circulates around your body. This is how much access he's got to your body. Okay? And then, just to quote you the solution to that, in the final hadith which we shall mention, the Prophet ﷺ said that there is a fort, there is a secure fort that you can enter, fortress. And that fortress that you enter into, by which you save yourself from the influence of shaytan is dhikrullah, is the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person does the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, jab aadmi zikr karta hai, to wo qil'e mein band ho jata hai, shaytan us pe hamla nahi kar sakta. Lekin jo shakhs ghafil rehta hai, to ek hadith, ek riwayat mein aata hai, the shaytan, people described shaytan as they saw him, and they said he has a beak, like the beak of a bird, a long beak, and he sits on the left shoulder. And when you are in a state of heedlessness, ghafla, when you don't do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spiritually, mentally, physically, through ibadah and recitation of the Quran and salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he puts his beak in your heart. The beak is then pointed in your heart, and he puts waswasa into your heart. Okay? He casts evil whispers into you, doubts into you. And this way, you remember what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Nas, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the people of mankind, who is the possessor of the people, who is the Lord of the people, from the evil of the one al-waswas al-khannas, who constantly whispers evil and then moves away. This is shaitan's work. This is how shaitan works. He casts whispers into your mind and then he goes away. Then you feel, oh, I was very good one day in the month of Ramadan, and then later on you again are instead in the trap of shaitan again. This is the temptations of shaitan. This is the way he puts evil into you. So always remember to do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make it a daily routine to do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the only way by which you can attack shaitan, by which you can shield yourself from his attack. And as Imam Al-Azhari beautifully mentioned, and I did mention to you this before, about the importance of understanding your enemy. तुम्हारा दुश्मन को पहचानने के बारे में इमाम गज़ाली रहमतुल्लाह ने फरमाया कि तुम्हारा दुश्मन शैतान है. एक दुश्मन तुम्हारा बिलमुकाबिल होता है, जिसे तुम देख सकते हो, जिसे तुम कत्ल करके ख़त्म कर सकते हो. लेकिन एक तुम्हारा ऐसा दुश्मन है, तुम्हारा नफ्स और तुम्हारा शैतान, कि जिसे न तुम देख सकते हो न तुम उसे ख़त्म कर सकते हो, और वो मुसलसल वार करता रहता है. लेकिन लोग उससे गफलत में बरतते हैं, उसको पहचानने की कोशिश नहीं करते हैं और उससे बचने की कोशिश नहीं करते हैं. This is your enemy that you cannot see, that you cannot kill, and is constantly attacking you. So understand him, understand shaitan, understand how he has befriended your nafs and made it as his official, that he does the work for him. He is the king and he has his officials in every single person's heart, and that is your nafs. So Imam Abd al-Sha'rani radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, أخذ علينا على عهد العام رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. This covenant has been taken from us, which reaches the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, أن نستعيذ بالله, that we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always seek refuge in Allah. ونستعد للشيطان باستعمال ما يبعده منا خوف الوسوسة المضرة في إيماننا وأعمالنا, and that we prepare ourselves to shield ourselves from shaitan, by which he moves away from us out of fear that he may cast doubts in our iman. Because remember one thing, if a person does not shield himself from the influence of shaitan, he will very easily cast doubts in your iman. He will say to you, who created you? Then you say Allah. Then he will do waswasa into your mind and you say, okay, who created Allah? And then, okay, so have this protected shield, that I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi radiallahu ta'ala, one of the great theologians, one of the great philosophers of Islam, al-Faylasuf, al-Muslim, great Islamic thinker, whose tafsir is unique and matchless, Mafatihul Ghaib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. In the latter times, in the end of his time, he was on his deathbed, and shaitan came to him, and shaitan casted doubts on him. He gave 101 proofs. Shaitan asked him, prove to me that Allah exists. He was a great man of Allah, he was a great thinker. He gave 101 proofs. Shaitan refuted every single one of them. So then in his heart he called upon his Shaykh Najmuddin al-Kubra radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The Shaykh was somewhere else and he was performing ablution, and the Shaykh had heard the call of his student and murid and disciple who was in a state of agony. He was in the agonies of death. And plus on top of that, the shaytaan was trying to snatch away the iman from him. So he had this basin with him and he shrieked. The Shaykh shrieked and shouted, "Why don't you say I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any dalil, without any proof?" Imam Fakhruddin Razi said that and shaytaan went away. So if you can understand this point, that even in the latter moments of your life, shaytaan can influence, shaytaan can tempt and cast doubt even in the greatest of scholars of that age. But it is only the work of those people who have purified their hearts that they can protect you and your family and your entire, the entire mankind, in fact, entire Muslim ummah from the influence of shaytaan, to be with a shaykh that protects you and purifies your heart. And then he says, because of this, he says, وَيَحْتَاجُ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الْعَمَلَ بِهَذَا الْعَهْدِ إِلَى السُّلُوكِ عَلَى يَدِ شَيْخٍ صَادِقٍ يَسْلُكُ بِهِ. Anyone who wants to fulfill this covenant properly and reach perfection in understanding the influence of shaytaan and protecting himself from shaytaan, he needs to undergo a strict routine of struggle and suluk, which is going in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Suluk, under a guided shaykh. حتى يدخله الحضرات التي تحرق كل من قرب إليها من الشياطين, until when you go under the supervision of that shaykh, he will, indicate to you which dhikr to do. You will reach a shield, a hadara. You will reach a state in which every single thing from the influence of shaitan that comes to you, approaches to you, it will burn. It can't reach you. Subhanallah. وَيَصِيرُ الشَّيْطَانُ يَفِرُّ مِنْ ظِلِّهِ, to the extent that you will become of such a degree of proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that shaitan will even flee from your shadow. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as the other al-Khulafa al-Rashidin, was amongst them, about whom the Prophet ﷺ said that the shaitan flees from the shadow of Umar. This is how much iman he had, unshakable faith, he said. And then he says, وَذَلِكَ بِالزُّهْدِ الْكَامِلِ فِي حَلَالِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا بِقَدْرِ الضَّرُورَةِ. And how will you gain that state? You will only gain it when you have abstinence, taqwa. In halal things, let alone staying away from haram, even in the halal things, only take that which is necessary for you. Don't exceed the limits. Don't eat too much. Don't drink too much. And so forth. Have abstinence. And through abstinence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will purify the mirror of your heart. And then you will be able to understand from the places from which shaitan attacks you. If a person doesn't have zuhud, doesn't have abstinence, and he is in pursuit of the wealth, hoarding wealth, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيْلُ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالَهُ وَعَدَّدَهُ يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَهُ. Yeah? The one who counted wealth and hoarded it. And he thought that this wealth will be of benefit to him. This wealth will be a means of him living in this dunya forever. No. Okay? It is finite, it is going to destroy you if you don't use it in the correct way, the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَيُضَاحُ ذَلِكَ أَنَّ الْقَوْمَ جَعَلُوا الْحَضَرَاتِ ثَلَاثًا. The Sufi Kiram, the Sufis have made the present, three types of presence. You are either in the presence of Allah, you are always conscious of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over you. This is Hadratullah, being in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I gave an example of Hazrat Ibrahim bin Adham radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was sat in the masjid, and once he was feeling very tired, he exhausted himself in ibadah, and he just stretched his legs in the masjid. And there was a voice from the unseen saying, مَا هَكَذَا يُجْلَسُ عِنْدَ الْمُلُوكِ. This is not the way to sit in front of the kings. He was always in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always in the presence of Allah. Whether they are eating or drinking or sleeping, they are in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then, lower to that is hadratul khalq, being in the presence of the people. When you are with people, when you see people, when you are in public, you tend not to commit sins. You stay away from committing sins openly. This is another deterrent for you from committing sins. To be with people, with the right people, in public. Because if a person is in isolation, he will be very easily drawn into the temptations of shaitan. He will do things which he could not even think about doing in public. like what people do on their laptops, or what they do in closed doors in their bedrooms, which they couldn't even think about in doing it publicly. And then there is hadratul khayal, the presence of your mind, of your thought. This thought in your mind, just a thought, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. And then he mentions a beautiful point. He says here, فَمَتَى خَرَجَ الْمُسْتَيْقِظُ مِنْ حَضْرَةِ الشُّهُودِ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَرَاهُ رَكِبَهُ إِبْلِيسِ. That moment in which you lose that belief or that thought that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you, that moment of time in which you think Allah is not watching you, shaytaan mounts upon you. Shaytaan rides upon you. And before that he said, مِثْلُ هَذَا يَكُونُ مِنْ حَمِيرِ إِبْلِيسِ. People who don't have zuhud and abstinence in this dunya, they are like the donkeys of shaytaan. The shaytaan rides on them and he takes them wherever he wants. We have become the donkeys of shaytaan. Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Dehli actually saw people in the form of shaytaan, in the form of donkeys and swines. Through the eye of basira, the eye of the heart. He saw people because of the evil vices that we have within our hearts. Some people appeared like swine, some people appeared like donkeys, some people appeared like monkeys. Whichever sifat you have in your heart, that is how you appear before the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, فَمَنْ تَوَسْوَسَ فِي صَلَاتِهِ فَهُوَ لَمْ يَدْخُلْ حَضْرَةَ اللَّهِ. Whoever has waswasa in his namaz, he has not entered into the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone asked Hazrat Shayban al-Ra'i radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Imam Abd was there as well, so was Hazrat Shayban al-Ra'i, a great Gnostic. Someone asked a question and said, "Oh Shaykh," the question was posed to Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, a great Imam of the law of jurisprudence, of the Hanbalite Madhab, the founder of the Hanbalite Madhab. Not these Hanbalis who are now calling themselves Hanbalis, but they're actually Salafis, the true Hanbalis. The founder of them, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, a great wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People asked him, someone came to him and asked him, "I have a lot of waswasa in namaz. I forget, did I pray the second rakat or the third rakat and so forth. I feel doubtful. So what should I do?" He said, if it occurs for the first time, then repeat your namaz. But then if it reoccurs, if it happens frequently, then go towards which your heart inclines towards. Okay? This was his ruling. This was the ruling which you find in the books of Sharia. Has Shayban al-Ra'i heard this and he said, why did he find a doubt in the first place? Why was there a waswasa in his namaz in the first place? There shouldn't have been any waswasa with it. You should have been present in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You should be God conscious. You have to repeat all those namaz which you have prayed in which you had waswasa. Allah. So this is their maqam. So Imam Shani rahmatullah says, فَصَلَاتُهُ سُورَةٌ لَا رُوحَ فِيهَا. A person who has waswasa in his namaz is like, it is just a picture with no spirit in it, with no soul in it. It is inanimate. وَهِيَ بَاطِلَةٌ فِي مَذْهَبِ الْخَوَاسِ. And it is nullified and it is void in the madhab of the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That namaz is void. Look at our namaz. We have a lot of waswasa in namaz. Thinking about the dunya and so forth. That great wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Delhi, who was praying behind the Imam in the Grand Mosque of Delhi. And then that Imam, like myself, was thinking about a lot of things in his wife's praying namaz. He was thinking, okay, I'm going to buy cattle from here and then take it to this place and sell it there, bring the money and bring some more cattle and go to this place and sell it off there. He was thinking about this in namaz, the Imam, and the wali was praying behind him. When the namaz had ceased, finished, the Imam and the people had dispersed. The Imam then the Muqtadi, the wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, discreetly came to the Imam. And he said, "Oh Imam, you've exhausted me. First I went to the cattle farm and then you took me to the shops to sell these cattle and so forth. Then you went to this place, to that place. You've exhausted me. What namaz were you praying? What kind of namaz were you praying?" I hope there's no one who is like that behind me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to have this God consciousness in our namaz, inshallah. And then he says, يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ إِعَادَتُهَا. According to the khawas, the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this person has to repeat that namaz. لِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى مَا سَمَحَ عِبَادَهُ بِالْغَفْلَةِ إِلَّا خَارِجَ الصَّلَاةِ. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not forgiven people of heedlessness only outside of namaz. أَمَّا فِيهَا فَلَا. With regards to being in namaz, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive a person from being heedlessness. وَلِذَلِكَ أَوْجَبَنَا الْإِسْتِعْدَادِ لِطَرْدِ إِبْلِيسِ. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to prepare ourselves to cast away Iblis. لِأَنَّ مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُ وَاجِبٌ. Because the ruling is the thing by which a necessity is not completed is wajib in itself. i.e., if namaz cannot be completed without preparation, then preparation in itself becomes wajib. وفي الحديث أعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. The hadith says about ihsan, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though you see Him. Be God conscious when you are praying namaz that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of you. Al-Hatim radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Al-Asram I think, about him, Imam al-Ghazali says that people asked him how he prayed his namaz, and he said, I pray my namaz that when I face towards the Qibla, I find myself in the haram, in the sacred sanctuary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then I find my feet on the bridge, which is thinner than a strand of hair and sharper than a sword. And behind me, I find the angel of death. I feel this. And every single namaz I pray in that manner. This is the namaz which Allah accepts. This is the namaz which is the mi'raj, meaning the ascension of the believer. Okay, so it takes time to cast away these doubts, and there are many wadhaif that have been given. Inshallah, I shall mention a few. Inshallah. Birshib ya Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Maulana Muhammad ma'al al-jud wal karam wa alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallam. So many awliya kiram have written about casting away doubts and waswasa. The first thing they said that whenever you have a doubt, always seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Say a'udhu billahi minash shaytaan. The wazifa is, if you can do this after the Fajr prayer and after the Maghrib prayer, if you can pray A'udhu billahi minash shaytaan rajim and La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim 11 times after the Fajr prayer and after the Maghrib prayer. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you this yaqeen in your heart and cast away the evil whispers of shaytaan. Or you can pray this verse whenever shaytaan casts doubts into you. هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. All this آمنت بالله ورسله. And there is another wazifa given by Al-Azhari rahmatullah alayhi about people who have a lot of doubts and waswasa by which they are grieved and worried and they have a lot of tension because of that. To recite La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim, obviously preceded and ending with Durood Sharif an odd number of times, and then praying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim 60 times and brewing it on water. And doing this daily, first thing in the morning, before you eat anything, before you drink anything, to drink that water upon which this litany has been prayed and then blown upon. Insha'Allah, you will find this yaqeen, you will find sukoon in your brain, sukoon in your heart, sukoon in your mind, insha'Allah. And then they also say, people who have a lot of waswasa in namaz, then what you should pray before namaz is إِنِّي وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Pray this ayah and then start your namaz. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that pray La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-azim or a'udhu billah, and not spit, literally spit, but make that sound towards your left. Spit towards your left, not literally spitting towards your left in namaz, otherwise there'll be quite a few problems. And then when you fold your arms, then fold them below your navel tightly. Okay? Every single rukn constituent of namaz that you pray, do it tightly. This is why they say, this is why the hadith says that, flatten your back, make it straight, grasp your knees properly in ruku'. When you are in qiyam, then hold your hands properly against your navel, against the navel. This will cast away the doubts and look downwards. Okay, and every rukun of namaz, if you pray like that, inshallah, it will cast away the doubts from your mind. And also, most importantly, is to actually understand what you're praying in namaz. When you pray Surah Al-Fatiha, the first verse is the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember how Allah subhanahu is the most bountiful, how He is extended, uncountable, innumerable bounties, favors without our own work. We are being given these bounties for granted. Think about it. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Maliki yawmiddin. Think about the day of judgment. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Think about that sole source of help and assistance, the succour, ultimate succour and help is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you understand these tasbih, Subhan Rabbil A'la, glory be to Allah, my Lord, who is the greatest, Al-Azim, the greatest, the mightiest, At-tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyib. All verbal, physical, financial worship is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you understand the du'as that you pray in namaz, the surahs that you pray in namaz, inshallah that will cast away the doubts. You will have more tawajjuh towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to cast away the doubts of shaytaan, to understand the attacks of shaytaan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from al-wasawis. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد معدن الجود والكرم وآله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا من فضلك علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع ومن قلب لا يخشع ومن نفس لا تشبع ومن دعوة لا يستجاب لها. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكيها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها فاغفر لها. اللهم لا تدع لنا في مقامنا هذا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا مريضا إلا شفيته ولا طالبا إلا وفقته ولا عسرا إلا يسرته ولا مشتاقا لزيارة حبيبك المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم إلا بلغته ورزقته. اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. جزا الله عنا سيدنا مولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وبارك وسلم ما هو أهله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
سأسأل ما الذي قدمت في دنياي ينجيني فكيف إجابتي من بعد ما فرطت في ديني. ويا ويحي ألم أسمع كلام الله يدعوني ألم أسمع لما قد جاء في قاف وياسين ألم أسمع بيوم الحشر يوم الجمع والدين ألم أسمع مناد الموت يدعوني يناديني. فيا رباه عبد تائب من ذا سيأويني سوى رب غفور واسع للحق يهديني. أتيت إليك فارحمني وثقل في موازيني وخفف في جزائي أنت أرجى من يجازيني.